third webinar in our Educational Leadership in the Age of AI series. And today our topic is around navigating AI literacy in K-12, insights for educators and leaders. So this webinar is hosted by Digital Promise and funded by the Siegel Family Endowment and the Robin Hood Learning and Technology Fund. So we'd love if everyone in the chat could introduce yourself. You could share your name, your role, your district or organization, the state you're coming from, and something you're hoping to learn today. And again, we're just gonna pause here, wait for all of our folks and attendees to trickle in. Great, I see some folks typing in the chat already. Again, if you're just joining, if you can share your name, where you're joining us from, and something you're hoping to learn today. Great, I see some folks from New York, Chicago, Maryland, Asheville, North Carolina, California. Ooh, we have some international friends here from Ghana, some folks from San Diego, Jersey. Amazing, thank you all for sharing. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'll introduce myself. And so my name is Keun-woo Lee. I'm a learning experience designer at Digital Promise. I'm really excited to be with you all today. I'll be kicking things off here. I'll review our agenda for this webinar, and then I'll pass it to my colleague, Kelly Mills, who will share more. And so our agenda for today is we're going to start off with some big ideas. So we're excited to share an overview of how educators can build on foundational skills to promote AI literacy. So again, in a moment, Kelly will share some of those big ideas. Then I will come back and facilitate an activity to help reinforce those big ideas. But a majority of our time together will be hearing from our expert panel about their experiences building on existing initiatives to integrate AI literacy across grades and subjects connected to infrastructure and the workforce. And so finally, at the end of our webinar today, we'll have some time for audience question and answer. And so a little bit of housekeeping that I want to review is that if you have a question that you would like for us to discuss during our Q&A time at the end, we would love if you could use the Zoom Q&A feature. And so try to put your questions in that part of Zoom. But any other comments or comments directed towards the audience or to our panelists, you can enter in the chat, just like you're doing right now. I see more folks are introducing themselves. We're so happy to have you here. Have a wide array of folks here. And yeah, we encourage you to interact with each other in the Zoom chat. You can add comments, you can add little emoji reactions if you agree with something. We love the plus sign for that. And so great, I think that's all for housekeeping. I'm now gonna pass it to my colleague, Kelly Mills. Oh, Kelly, you're on mute.
Oh, that always happens, sorry. Hi, everyone, I'm Kelly Mills. I am Director of Learning Pathways Design at Digital Promise. And I'm excited to talk to you today about AI literacy and the foundational skills to build from to promote AI literacy. And so today we're gonna talk through 3 big ideas, which I think is on the next slide there. Yes, thanks. So the first big idea is that AI literacy includes skills to use, understand, and evaluate AI systems and tools. The second big idea is that foundational skills that are essential for AI literacy are related to existing initiatives in education. And finally, districts can integrate AI literacy into K-12 education across grades and subjects. And so I'm going to talk through these 3 big ideas relatively quickly, but we encourage you to drop all your reactions and questions in the chat so that we can address those at the end of the webinar. Okay, so moving along to our first big idea, that AI literacy includes skills to use, understand, and evaluate AI systems and tools. Next slide. We introduced in a recently published blog post that will drop in the chat right now, framework for AI literacy. And we define it as AI literacy includes the knowledge and skills that enable humans to critically understand, use, and evaluate AI systems and tools to safely and ethically participate in an increasingly digital world. And you'll notice that our framework has 3 loops for use, understand, and evaluate. And those loops indicate that there's multiple on-ramps to AI literacy, and also that these practices can be happening and building on each other at the same time. Next slide. And so while AI tools are really new and likely intimidating for most people, the skills that we use to critically understand, use, and evaluate technology are more familiar. Next slide. And so what are these skills? The foundational skills essential for AI literacy are related to existing initiatives in education, which brings us to our second big idea. And we've identified, that's okay, you can move on. And we've identified 3 foundational literacies for AI literacy: media literacy, digital literacy, and computational thinking. And there's no consensus definition for all 3 of these foundational skill sets. And also there's other related and overlapping literacies, such as digital literacy or data literacy, which we include as part of these 3. And so for clarity, we draw on some definitions to guide us in how to identify them. We define media literacy as the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of communication. And that definition is from the National Association for Media Literacy Education. We define digital citizenship as thinking creatively, behaving safely, and participating responsibly in the digital world. And that's from Common Sense Media and the Digital Citizen curriculum that they've developed. And we define computational thinking as solving problems systematically so that a computer could support the process or product development. Digital Promise has done extensive amount of work in computational thinking specifically. And we have a framework presented in a paper that we'll drop in the chat now if you'd like to learn more about the practices and skill sets for computational thinking. But we're going to talk about all 3 of these today and how they're promoted through AI literacy, or how you can engage with them through AI literacy. So schools have been engaging in all of this work for decades, right? These probably sound familiar to you. And AI is the newest media or modality that we need to learn how to apply these skill sets to. And so how do these skill sets show up in AI? And that's what we'll talk about in the next few slides here. So AI can show up in our everyday lives. For instance, online shopping, an algorithm could make recommendations, right? And so if a user's interacting with AI in this way, we would suggest media literacy skills, such as navigating the information landscape, digital citizenship skills, such as data privacy and ownership, and understanding how to control sharing data. And then computational thinking and understanding what are the appropriate tools for the specific task, question, or goal, and what are the appropriate platforms to use. Another way that a user could engage with AI is, next slide, is problem solving, right? So for instance, they might be training an AI system to recognize a banana or not a banana. And in doing so, we would need to promote media literacy and identifying bias and representation in data collection, digital citizenship and identifying appropriate applications to innovate solutions with AI tools, and computational thinking skills such as algorithmic thinking and pattern recognition to train the AI system. And finally, the last example is creating with AI. So creating synthetic content specifically with AI, such as leveraging large language models such as ChatGPT to perhaps generate some text, right? So you would use media literacy to evaluate outputs such as, is this appropriate for the right audience, and navigating mis and disinformation, digital citizenship, and thinking about appropriate and ethical application of the content and citing it appropriately, and computational thinking skills such as abstraction, decomposition, testing, and debugging such as articulating and modifying prompts. And we're going to take a deep dive into this example next with an activity that Keun-woo is going to lead us through.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly, for that helpful overview of how AI literacy relates to other foundational skill sets. So we're going to build on that idea with this activity. And so to kick us off, I'd love to get a rough survey of prior experience using large language models such as ChatGPT, Gemini, etc. in the chat. And so please enter a 1 if you have used these platforms before, and a 0 if you're not familiar. I already see our chat getting populated. Thank you everyone for engaging. And want to name that whatever stage you are at is perfectly fine for this activity. I see a lot of 1s. I see some 0s as well. Thank you all for sharing. And yeah, for our activity, next slide. We want to help show and not just tell you how AI literacy helps exercise other skill sets. And so the goal is that this reinforces, again, the big ideas that Kelly just shared. We're going to engage with ChatGPT. And so I want to note we're not necessarily promoting this product, but today we are going to use it as a learning tool. If you have a ChatGPT account, please open that now. And if you don't have an account, no worries. We have an alternative through the AI Pedagogy Project. So next slide, I just want to preview this for you. If you entered a 0 into the chat, you're not as familiar. This is a great resource. On their website, they have a way of using ChatGPT without logging in, without them collecting your data through this tutorial. And so next slide, I want you to focus in on this yellow highlighted box, and that's where you would engage with the chatbot. We highly do encourage you to explore the AI Pedagogy Project, but please do so on your own time. Today, we'll just be focusing on interacting with the chatbot. And so for this activity, you should have ChatGPT open by now, and we're going to get into the headspace of a student. So let's imagine you're a student old enough to safely and ethically use ChatGPT. We're going to begin with a prompt. Write a thank you note to my teacher. We just put that in the chat if you want to copy and paste that in right now. And a quick note, throughout this activity, we won't necessarily share our outputs with each other, but we do encourage you to share any noticings or learnings in the chat. Great, and so hopefully you have that by now. And the next part of our activity is to go through some refinement and evaluating our output. So we want to alter our output, and we'll share some examples of how you might do that in the chat. You could provide more detail, alter the tone, modify the length. We also welcome other ideas as well if you want to, again, share that in the chat. We recommend trying to refine your prompt through at least 3 iterations to see what comes up. We'll give you a minute here to tinker with that. Again, if you have other ideas to refine the prompt, feel free to share that in the chat. And yeah, we'd also love if you could share any noticings, anything that's interesting that's coming up as you go through this quick activity. If there's anything potentially alarming about your outputs that you want to share, please feel free to do so. Just a moment there. All right, I see someone sharing in the chat, thinking that the output is really helpful. Thank you for sharing. Feel free to continue sharing in the chat. And now I'm going to kind of walk us through how this activity is sort of a primer in applying these different skills. So in terms of computational thinking, we can see how a skill like decomposition or abstraction can apply to prompting. You can decompose different parts of a prompt and abstract the most important details, which I'm sure is something you exercised while you were doing it, whether you even noticed it or not. Let's see. And then I'm seeing some more conversation in the chat here. Next slide, please. And yeah, in terms of media literacy, I think we want to underscore that it's important to evaluate your output for incorrect information. I see someone put in the chat, I feel like a teacher would know for sure this was written by a bot. So exactly, is this a tone that it would really be emulated by a student? That's something to consider. And we want to remind you that with generative AI tools, the output is synthetic. So AI systems are just computers and they do make errors. So for example, earlier today, I engaged with this prompt and it started to create synthetic information about lesson details. Next slide. It also generated details about the impact of the teacher that I did not provide. And so again, none of this detail was provided to the chatbot, and it created an output that may or may not be true. And although in the context of a thank you note, this may seem relatively low risk, something that you can use as a first draft per se, or use for ideas of what to say in a thank you note, we can only imagine the ethical implications of AI generating false information in other contexts. And again, underscoring the importance of the human in the loop and the role of media literacy to engage in fact-checking and critical thinking. And lastly, if we want to consider digital citizenship, we want to consider the ethics of data privacy. So for a tool like large language models, there are age restrictions, so users must be over the age of 13. Again, kind of in our priming for this activity, imagining that you're a student old enough to ethically and safely use this tool. Another consideration is that you want to avoid personal identifiable information that you share in this context, such as name, address, birthday, etc., in order to maintain your safety as a user. So I know this was a really simple activity. Again, hopefully it helped reinforce some of our bigger ideas. And we'd love to hear from you in the chat before we move on to our third big idea, and I pass it back to Kelly. What existing opportunities are there in your school or district to integrate AI literacy? And I know not everyone here works on a school or district level. Maybe you work at an ed tech company, but whatever lens you're coming in from, we'd love to hear from you. What other existing opportunities are there in your school or district to integrate AI literacy? Great, thank you. And I'll pass it back to Kelly.
Yes, hi everybody. I'm excited. I'll give everybody just a few minutes to drop, think about the question and respond in the chat. It looks like some people maybe image generation or capturing formative assessment. Maybe there'll be an opportunity to talk through some of these in more detail after the panel that we're about to get started, because I'm actually really interested in learning more about this. Okay, so let me quickly go over our third big idea, which is that districts can integrate AI literacy into K-12 education across grades and subjects. And I'm just going to quickly go over some ideas here, because really the most of this discussion is actually geared towards our panelists, and we're excited to hear from them. So the first big point that I want to make here is in regards to Portrait of a Graduate. Portrait of a Graduate is a framework that many district leaders use to articulate the skill sets that they hope that students embody by graduation. Skills such as create, to solve, and share, and care for and contribute to society. And Portrait of a Graduate provides a very useful lens to apply and promote AI literacy and other foundational skills. In fact, the National Education Technology Plan suggests to leverage Portrait of a Graduate to implement technology in ways that align with a district's vision for education. And a strategy to integrate AI literacy and other foundational skills into K-12 learning across grades and subjects is integrated learning pathways. And these identify and design opportunities for students to develop AI literacy throughout the K-12 learning experience. For instance, in this example, you can see automation can be integrated in language arts, math, social studies, and science. We believe that AI literacy and other foundational skills should be interdisciplinary. In our recently released paper about integrated learning pathways discusses this approach in much more detail. And I think that was just drafted in the chat as well. Okay, without further ado, we are now moving on to our panel. And I'm super excited to introduce our panelists today. I know they've done really great work related to AI literacy and foundational skill building. And so I'll let them introduce themselves. Go ahead, Brooke.
Good afternoon. My name is Brooke Morgan. I'm the coordinator of innovative learning in Talladega County Schools. I am in my 26th year in education, 8 years at the district level, and just really excited to be here to learn with you guys today.
Josh?
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Joshua Elder. I'm Vice President and Head of Grant Making at Siegel Family Endowment. And so we are a foundation that's focused on understanding and shaping the impact of technology on society and have been deeply involved in the computational thinking, computer science education space for quite some time. And really excited to be in today's conversation. Also have a background in education from being a teacher, school leader, and all things in between, and excited for the conversation.
Awesome. So I'm going to kick it off with a question for Brooke. And so Brooke, as a district leader, you've worked with building leaders and teachers to develop system-wide K-12 learning opportunities for foundational skills for AI literacy. Can you describe your approach to build foundational skills such as computational thinking for AI literacy across a school district?
Of course. So over the past 5 years, our district has been part of a research collaborative with Digital Promise to develop a K through 12 computational thinking pathways. And we used this approach to make sure that students K through 12 in all content areas had access to those lessons. So we chose leaders from each of our schools. We call them experts down the hall. And they had intensive training on the different competencies in computational thinking. And then they helped actually design the pathway and create lesson plans for our teachers to use district-wide. I think the key to the success of our initiative has been those building leaders who have provided that professional development for the teachers. They've modeled lessons, they've helped them plan lessons, and just basically giving them support at their point of need to make sure that they are implementing computational thinking and that everybody has that same language. And so, AI is really kind of new in the K-12 world. As far as generative AI is concerned, we've had AI tools at our disposal for many years for assessments and things of that nature. But I think that ChatGPT and tools like that have really started to change the way we do things in K-12 education. And so building on our success of computational thinking rollout, we are using that same model to really help our teachers learn how to use AI effectively. And before our students can really be successful, our teachers really have to have an in-depth understanding of the capabilities of AI, the things that maybe they need to watch out for. And so we have used those teacher leaders, that same group of teacher leaders, and we've had 3 training sessions this year with them where we've really talked a lot about ChatGPT. We've looked at Magic School, Curipod, really focused on how can AI help our teachers do their jobs better and save them time. And so it has been really, really successful. The teachers have learned so much and then gone back to their base schools and shared that information with other teachers. And so they are really, I think, feeling more confident, because I think when we initially started, there was a lot of concern about, we're not using this, our students will just cheat, they won't do any of their independent writing anymore. And we really had to kind of change that mindset. And so one thing that we've really talked to our teachers about is, it's up to us to educate our students on academic integrity. And as the teacher, there are things we can do to ensure students are being ethical with AI. We have to make sure that they understand the consequences of violating, the academic integrity policy. Teachers need to know their students and know how their students write. It's really easy to read something that AI produces and know that no, Johnny did not do that. But if they never really look at students' writing, it will be hard to maybe determine that. Another thing that we've done, we have a tool called Go Guardian where it manages the Chromebooks. We're a one-to-one district, and so teachers can actually lock down tabs. So when they're doing writing or anything like that, they can lock down to where that's the only tab they can have open. So that's another way to kind of safeguard about that. But I think the most important thing that we've talked about is how teachers need to kind of change the way they create assignments and create prompts for students, and to just make sure that there is a human element and that it's a student-centered approach, so that you can't just have a generic prompt because you're just going to get a generic answer. But if the prompt that you give the students takes emotional intelligence to answer and personal experience to answer, then that's the goal, you know. So moving forward next year, we're going to really focus a lot more on creating those types of lessons and those types of prompts for our students. And we're going to embed that into our computational thinking pathway. That will just be more resources that we can feed our teachers so that it will save them planning time, and these lessons will be vetted. So we'll know that they're quality lessons that all students will have exposure and access to.
Thanks so much for sharing, Brooke. I'm going to move on with a question for Josh, which is, Josh, as a funder, you have perspective about the impact of technology on society across learning infrastructure and workforce. How is AI literacy and these foundational skills preparing students for today's evolving technological infrastructure and workforce?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And thanks, Brooke. I mean, it's been amazing just hearing about all the work that you all are doing, and just knowing that it's not just saying, here, teachers, figure it out, but like all the resources and support. And one of the things that was making me think about how teachers know their writing. You know who else also knows your writing really well? Your parents. And so when I'm bored, I will play with ChatGPT and send a text message to my mom just to see if she can like pick out if it's actually authentic or not. So, but that's a different story for a different day. I think for us, it's been really interesting, especially being a funder where we are probably the furthest removed from what's actually going on, especially when you think about classrooms. Even as a former educator, there's so much that has changed even before the pandemic, and definitely so after the pandemic. And so I think for us, one, I'm really appreciative for the great work that we are able to partner with some of the people that are here on this call. So I know Amber with the Robin Hood Learning Plus Tech Fund. I see Diane from the great work at Cornell Tech, Julie in Project Tomorrow. I think I saw Carol Fletcher and the great work she's doing with We Teach, and ESEP thinking about policy work. And I think for us, it has been a really interesting journey that we've started many years ago, where we were fortunate that our chairman is a computer scientist. And the importance in understanding how foundational the components of computer science education are, especially when you break that down and look into computational thinking and metacognition. Not that every student needs to be prepared to go and work in a tech company. If they choose that route, great. But those are core fundamental skills that will set children up for success, no matter the pathway that they choose. And then when you layer that into this tech-driven world that we now live in, and we cannot go even a minute without hearing conversations around AI. And so when you think about like, why is that important? Why is AI literacy important? It is making sure that we are providing students to, if they want to pursue this, to go deeper and have a passion and career in it, great. But honestly, no matter what pathway they choose, these literacies are going to be critical for their success. And I think that's kind of the path that we have been fortunate enough to take and be supported on, that we're really thinking about how can this be integrated into what's already happening. Because again, we talked about it, a few of those slides talked about all of these things have been happening for quite some time. It's now thinking about how they are all interrelated to AI. And so we're fortunate that we have our deep work that's going on in the K-12 system, but then we get to tie that to our workforce work and think about how are we setting students up for success as they navigate the world of work. And then we're really fortunate to have a portfolio on infrastructure. And thinking about when we think about this, it's mostly focused on digital infrastructure, but it's also interconnected to both the physical infrastructure and the social infrastructure of how we're connected as humans. And so really appreciate all the great work and just looking forward to thinking about how we can continue to support as a funder, being able to have this 30,000-foot vantage point to really think about what the impact is having and how we can continue deepening the experiences for students.
Thanks so much, Josh. And piggybacking right on kind of that last point about people and infrastructure, thinking critically, large inequities, this is a question for both of you. Large inequities continue to exist in access to equipment and learning opportunities needed to build AI literacy skills for students that experience marginalization. How can we center inclusivity as we scale and sustain AI literacy?
So I'll speak to that. I think that I mentioned earlier that we are a one-to-one device district, and we have been for about 13 years, which was pretty unusual when we started in Alabama. I think we were only the third district in the state that went one-to-one. And I think that, with COVID and the ESSER funds, I think that probably more students have access to devices now than ever before. So I see that as an issue that has really, regardless of how it came to be, I do think has been a positive thing because students are not hindered by not having access to those types of tools. As far as the curriculum side of it, when I mentioned our CT pathways, we have that K-12 all content areas because we wanted our students to have access to that knowledge regardless of what grade they were in, regardless of what class they were in. Prior to that, any type of computer science that we had, STEAM, we had specialized classes that maybe only a few students were able to take. But when we have the approach of a K-12 pathway, and we embed computational thinking and AI into our PBL planning. We have a PBL planning mat that we kind of adopted district-wide that we created that prompts teachers, okay, where are you going to fit this in? So that it's just embedded in everything we do. And the planning aspect just becomes second nature to teachers because they know, okay, this is the project I'm doing. How can I embed data analysis, data collection? How can I embed algorithmic thinking or some type of model or simulation? So, those things are very prevalent in our classrooms. Our biggest challenge has been teacher turnover and just making sure that we are able to provide that training every year to the new teachers so that we're all on the same page and that students still have access regardless of who their teacher is.
And I think on our side, some of the things that we have been thinking about and proactively supporting, I think one is just thinking about for all, right? Like if you look at some of our early support in the computer science education, it was thinking about CS for all and not just for some. And how can you go about that and providing what would that look like, whether that's integration or making sure that all students are getting equitable access within the school day. And I think that's even more important when you think about AI and the literacies needed to understand, to really be able to critically assess how to leverage and utilize AI in your everyday life. And also knowing that a lot of the students that are oftentimes left out of these opportunities are disproportionately impacted by the AI and the tech that is advancing so rapidly. And so I think for us, really making sure that we're supporting things that are pushing for that equitable access. And then how do you also provide resources for the broader ecosystem, whether that's providing additional support for teacher professional learning, being able to, like I said, with our infrastructure work, thinking about what are the actual infrastructure needs that both the school and broadly speaking, the community needs, right? Because I think this is one thing where there's a part of this conversation where a lot of this is happening and we're talking about things that are happening in school, but also when we think about students and families, how much time is spent outside of the school system And if they don't have access to the infrastructure that's needed, they're also then going to be put behind. And so how do we make sure we're providing those resources that they're connected both at home as well as in the school environment, which has proven to be critical and challenging, again, especially from what we've seen kind of in this post-pandemic world.
Absolutely. Thank you both for those great points. We're now going to open it up. I see there's many questions from the audience, and we encourage everybody to continue to add questions and comments and to continue the conversation. And Keun-woo's going to share start us off with a discussion.
Yeah, help us moderate. Actually, before we dive into that, I was wondering, Josh, you just made a really beautiful comment about, that infrastructure piece of not just at school, but at home. Brooke, I'm wondering if you have a perspective that you want to share from Talladega on, you mentioned the one-to-one devices, but kind of how to reinforce that equity piece that's not just at school, but is kind of carries home into informal environments as well.
Sure. So our students, they have access to a device that they can actually take home with them. And so they have access 24/7 to their device. One challenge that we did have, especially when we went virtual for COVID, is that we had some students who didn't have internet access at home. But we were able to provide hotspots for them. And that was really effective. We also did things like we just had to think outside the box. So we had some buses that had Wi-Fi that we had a project that we were doing. We called it rolling study halls, and it's where students who had the longest bus routes could do homework on the bus. And so we were able to take those buses and park them in our community church parking lots, and parents and students were able to pull up to the bus and access the Wi-Fi from there too, if they weren't able to access it from home. So, there are ways to work around some of those things, and sometimes it just takes some out of the box thinking to make sure that students have all the tools and resources they need.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I really want to echo some appreciation around these pieces of equity that you all are sharing, whether it's CS for All or CT Pathways, or integrating it in a way that reaches all learners. I think I'm seeing some of that in the chat as well. So yeah, thank you for that really brilliant conversation. We do have some questions from the audience, and one of them is around, so I'm going to read the question and then I might zoom out a little bit and reframe it a little bit, but one question is, do you have a prompt structure design, and how do you categorize them for teachers to use for their students? I think this kind of came up, Brooke, when you were speaking about kind of like guidance and resources for teachers. I thought it was really, really great that you were kind of almost shifting agency back to teachers as designers for learning, right? So you're thinking, we have this new tool, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of misconceptions about how it could be used right around cheating. And, there's already data that shows it's not increased cheating. But I loved how you shifted that to think about teachers designing lessons that promote more critical thinking or center around personal experiences, right? So I guess this question, I want to kind of zoom out a bit. Maybe you can speak to some of the resources and guidance that you're providing to teachers to support them through this process. You spoke a little bit about the project-based learning, the PBL, but yeah, what are the sort of like structures and supports that you provide?
Sure. So one of the days that we had training this year, we really talked a lot about prompt engineering. And so we learned a lot of different models and just kind of gave teachers time to just play with it. We think it's really important that teachers use the tools, use different prompts, change prompts around to see what the output is. And I think one thing to note, and I think it was mentioned earlier, is not everything that you get from ChatGPT or these other generative AIs are accurate. Funny story, I think ChatGPT had been out about a month, and we're from the South, so we're big football fans, big Auburn fans, and my husband, he's an attorney, and he said that he just typed in there, tell me the story of the 1994 Auburn versus something game or whatever. And so he said he read it and he said it had a lot of accurate like stats in it, but then at the end it said that Auburn lost the game. And he was like, Auburn did not lose that game. I was there. And I said, well, what was your prompt again? And he told me, and I said, well, you said, tell me a story. And I said, so using that word story, I think may have been why it was not as accurate. But that's a good lesson that, you have to double check information that you get sometimes because it may not be accurate. And we want to make sure that students have those same skills. And so when teachers experience that themselves, they can say, look, you're not always going to get exactly what you think you're going to get. And you've got to go back and check and you've got to do your due diligence there. But another interesting story because, there for a minute, AI was in the news every day. There was an attorney in North Alabama who used ChatGPT to write a brief and he submitted it and it cited a case from New York that did not even exist. And he got disbarred. So that made big news in our state, and I just thought, wow, what a hard lesson to learn. So, there are things like that I think we have a responsibility to, really inform our students and teachers as well of the dangers and just to make sure that they're on top of it and not putting too much faith into the outputs that they're getting with certain prompts.
And I think one thing that I'll just commend even today and what I'm seeing more of, and I know it's hard if I put myself back into the role of the teacher because time is so limited, but having that time to explore and play and like unpack and analyze, like, why isn't it wrong? And think about, like, to Brooke's point about her husband, like, I was at that game, so I know actually what happened. Let me see why it's different. And I think that's been fascinating. I think oftentimes we are so busy in the day to day, but as this is rapidly evolving, being able to kind of just play around and experiment. I mean, it's fascinating. I'm taking a course on AI, data, and ethics right now. And every night I'm just like learning so much just by reading theory, but then actually like playing around and putting it into application and being able to compare if I put this prompt into this large language model, how's it going to be different than this model? And again, I know that's a place of privilege to have that time, and so many people don't, but I think how do we create the time to explore and then have the conversation and discourse to make sure that if I am privileged to have that time, how can I share that information with someone who might not to make sure they can be as educated and informed as possible? Again, just knowing how quickly this train is moving.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. You're even sharing your own learning journey about this. This is an emerging thing. And Brooke, like that exercise that your husband did, I think that's something that we might even recommend. These products are really dazzling by design, but maybe test it out with something that you're an expert in and check it. Because I think that's like a great way to start and to really embed that criticality, which is a theme that I'm hearing a lot here today. I'm going to take another audience question. This is from Carol Fletcher. And she asked, what would you recommend as the first step that a school system should take to develop a systematic approach to addressing AI with students and educators? And so Brooke or Josh, you can start.
So, when I think about district initiatives, I don't really have the mindset of, oh, let's just pilot this here and pilot this there. Like, I feel like all of our kids deserve, cutting edge and the best and the greatest. And so, our approach in our district has always been, what's good for one school or one grade level is good for everybody. And so we work a lot together, and I will say that one thing I'm really proud of in our district is we host a symposium every year on one of our staff development days where we have over 100 presentations by our own teachers. So it's really important to us that our teachers own their own learning and that they become experts themselves and share it with others. And so we've just got that culture of learning, because I think if you don't, then you're going to have situations where you've got a handful of teachers who are just, on fire about things and they're trying everything and their kids are going to have access to everything. And then you're going to have this other group who they are terrified of technology. what they do works and they're not going to do anything other than what they do. But when you have the mindset that, hey, we're all in this together and we're all doing this, I think that is, in my opinion, the best way to initiate change district-wide. And is it perfect? No. And are there going to be hiccups? Yes. And road bumps. But the important thing is they have that culture, and that they don't have that fear of failure. Like, they know, hey, if this doesn't work and it totally bombs, that's okay. We're just going to try something else. And so that's just been a really important, I think, key to all the work we've done really in the past 10 years around STEM education and computational thinking and PBL. It's just having that open mindset and just really the expectation from the top down that this is what's best for students and this is what we're going to do, and we're going to do it collectively.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, I was going to say just some of what I've heard that, again, I've been fortunate enough at different conferences and seeing some of these like curated learning journeys that different funders and other org leaders are doing for superintendents, thinking about them as a decision maker and how they are not only getting excited about new initiatives and ideas to advance education for their students, and especially making it equitable education, but how they are viewing this from a systemic approach. Because I think those of us that have been in education for quite some time, we know the drill of coming back in during the summer. We wait to hear the new initiatives that are going to be rolled out. We know some of them are going to stick, some of them are going to fade away. And by the middle of the school year, we're already hearing about what's coming down the pike for the next school year and preparing ourselves for that. And I think one thing that we know, and maybe this is something that is different than in previous years, is that we know this isn't going away. It might be called something else to have a new gloss over it, but this is fundamentally here to stay when we think about, we've seen it with EdTech, and now I'm thinking about AI, CS, CT, and others. And so I've been encouraged by watching from afar, and I'm excited to see a little bit of this probably at ASU GSV coming up, knowing that there are superintendents there. How are they thinking about this from the long-term game and thinking about it in an incremental way, that they're not trying to do everything all at once? Because again, teachers are already doing so much, but how can they think about what is that long-term goal that they're trying to get their students to? And I think for me, again, as a funder, that has been a bit heartwarming, because I haven't seen that as much before. Usually it's all in or nothing, and trying to play the long-term game to make sure it is systemic and not just another thing that's going to fade away when the next initiative comes along.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think you're both were sort of speaking to building trust and building a culture around this. When we know that school district leaders and teachers on the ground are, constantly inundated with competing priorities, and a lot of them are fatigued and tired, especially post-pandemic. And, mind you, all the other things that happen in a school. Brooke, were you going to say something?
I was just going to go back to really agree with what Josh said too, and thinking about, preparing students for the workforce. This kind of work it's a life skill. So, when teachers say, oh, I just can't add one more thing. Well, you're not really adding, you're just approaching it a little differently. And this is critical. Like, our kids need to know how to use these tools, because their future jobs are going to depend on it. And I think when you set that why and that sense of urgency, hopefully it can replace some of the old ways of doing things. So you're not really adding to, you're just replacing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both. And yeah, I think we'll take about 2 more questions from the audience. So one is sort of geared towards Joshua, but Brooke, feel free to answer as well. How do you use AI to drive computational learning and CS pathways in STEM K-12? And I think, Brooke, you can even speak to how AI is sort of fitting into your current CT pathways.
Yeah, I think some of the work that we've seen, especially starting this year, again, goes back to that integration point. And I actually want to touch on what Brooke just said, because I think for me, this was something that was a big aha moment coming from my past work at CS for All, and then moving over to be at Siegel. But when we were thinking about like computational thinking, right? Like I think there was a time and place where if you told a teacher you have to incorporate computational thinking into your classroom, they would have said, I can't do one more thing. But then when you actually break down computational thinking, like the essential components, when you think about like decomposition and pattern recognition, all of that is actually good teaching pedagogy that you're already doing or being coached how to do. It's just called something else. And so I think it is so important to realize that so much of this is already happening, not systemically, but there are core components that are embedded within that. And so how can you highlight that and show that, as opposed to saying we're trying to fit this in? And I think that's the similar approach as well, especially on the non-technical side of AI, where we're thinking about integrating to be able to understand and analyze and evaluate, has been how we've been seeing some of our partners just thinking about integrating it and getting both teachers and students to really understand some of the basic fundamentals before thinking about moving deeper into that.
And Brooke, if you wanted to add anything around AI and how it fits into your current computational thinking learning pathways.
So that is our next step. We are working with our experts down the hall, and they have been actually creating computational thinking lessons. We've been dabbling, throwing some AI in there. They've been working on micro-credentials, teaching those lessons in their classrooms, and then collaborating around those with one another to get feedback. So that's been really our first step. And then moving forward next year, we hope to really start creating those AI lessons to embed into our pathway in the places where they best fit. So we think it's very important that we have vetted lesson plans and resources available for our teachers to help save them time. And we also know that they're more likely to use those with their students if they have them at their fingertips. So that's why the work that our experts down the hall, who are just classroom teachers, and we give them release time, because to me, those are the best experts to have doing this work, because they're the ones actually using these resources every day with their students.
And I think there's one thing I'll call out from the chat, and Diane, I appreciate you for putting in this, putting that in there with some of the work that you're leading. But there's a piece in there about the research that they're seeing about how computational thinking is actually building the teacher's confidence to be able to engage in CS and AI. And when you're thinking about, again, just that pivot and switch from then using the technical language, right? Like thinking about algorithms and debugging and abstraction, that you've already removing one step or one layer of the barrier to thinking about AI and others, because there's just such that intimidation factor. And then once you can do that, how can you just layer that on and build incrementally? I think it's so important. And again, the fact that there's actually research out there showing that. And so how can you incorporate that more to be able to build upon the work that's happening there? So I just wanted to call that out there.
Yeah, amazing. Appreciate that. I think, Josh, something you said earlier is, the world is becoming more digital. And so it's almost a necessity to be educated with these skills, whereas the expectation is not that everyone's a software engineer, right? Like students and teachers alike should be learning about these things. And if we think about computational thinking, it's sort of, you can think of it as a way of metacognition or systems thinking and problem solving. And Amy Hobson is here from New York City Public Schools, and she and her team are doing a lot of great work in like integrating this and even like lining up your students for class or in PE and things like that. So there's a lot of, hi Amy, a lot of applications there as well. So appreciate that. Actually, the next question, we have two more juicy questions. I think we can get to them. I'm going to start with Amy's question. So she asked, do you think there should be some prerequisites, such as digital citizenship, CT, digital literacy, before teachers and students learn about AI, or can it happen all at the same time? Maybe Brooke, you can start with kind of what's happening on the ground for you.
Yeah, sure. And I do think that most states have, a course of study for digital literacy that includes digital citizenship. That's a requirement in our state. So to me, I think it probably does come first before conversations about AI and even CT, just because that's kind of the foundation. And I would venture to guess that most states have those same requirements, that is a part of their course of study that teachers teach. One thing that we found is that the first course of study we had for many years, it was by grade band, like a K2, these were the standards, 3-5, these were the standards. And we found that teachers just always thought it was the other grade level's responsibility to teach those standards. And so we were really excited when the new one came out and it was broken down by grade level. And so that's how we designed our pathways, so that each grade level owned those standards and knew that we knew students were going to have that progression of skills from kindergarten all the way up on how to, pattern and have algorithmic thinking activities and that sort of thing. So they were starting even at kindergarten with some of those things. So I do think there probably needs to be a little bit of a background before you just jump right into computational thinking and AI.
And Josh, any thoughts you want to share in regards to sequencing of these skills?
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think we've seen a little bit of everything. I think depending on the context, how deeply embedded you are in the K-12 system versus kind of other aspects of that. And then again, I think also depending upon how you're arguing about this in terms of, are you thinking about this from like the actual deep technical expertise and thinking about putting kids into a career that is going to be more tech heavy? Or are you thinking about it in terms of the argument that equipping them with the skills that they're going to need no matter what they choose to do? And again, knowing that it will somehow be adjacent to technology just because that is the world that we live in. But we're seeing a little bit of both, depending on where people are on that spectrum and the type of work that they are doing.
And
yeah, thank you both for. Oh, go ahead, Brooke.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add one thing. I've been doing some reading. Just I think for years a lot of people were afraid that AI was going to replace humans in the workforce, and I think what we're seeing now is AI itself is not going to replace people, but people who know how to use AI will maybe replace people who don't know how to use it effectively in the future. So I think that that's why it's really important that our students understand how to use it and how to best benefit from it.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for sharing your expertise and such really thoughtful thinking around AI literacy right now. We have so many other questions we don't have time for. There was one good one I wanted to get to on how do we measure AI or generative AI literacy. Maybe that's something our next webinar can address. But yeah, I think we're gonna sort of wrap up with some next steps and some thank yous. So for everyone who attended, thank you again for being here and for engaging. Our chat was super active. We had some great questions. And yeah, so you'll receive resources that were mentioned in this webinar in a follow-up. This recording will also be posted on our Digital Promise YouTube channel. And next Friday is our next webinar in our Age of AI series. You can join us. It's 3 p.m. Eastern time with, I believe it's our CEO, Jean-Claude, and one of our VPs, Chala, who are guiding that discussion. And great, I think we can put that link for registration in the chat. But yeah, thank you all again for this conversation. So great to see you all.